Welcome to Supernormal M. This particular episode is going to be one of the 12 episodes that I had completed prior to getting fired because I just simply don't have enough time and I don't want to get a bit too far behind. I spent about 8 hours of my day sorting through 47,000 files from a 80-year-old guy who used to be in a rock band in France, because that was the gig I could get today. So, in lieu of present tense effort, I offer you past tense effort, although it is done with whatever their ways of doing it is done. Without further ado, haunted house. My partner and I rented a house in 2021. Because we were rushing to find a place, we ended up choosing an old 5-bedroom home. Far larger than what the two of us really needed, but it was what we could get at the time. The very first time I stepped inside, something felt off. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, just a quiet unease that settled somewhere in the back of my mind. All the interior doors had glass panels etched with strange patterns, which gave me the oddest sensation, like somebody could be peering through them at any moment. And I've always been sensitive to the energy of spaces and people, but tried to brush it off, convincing myself I just needed time to adjust to a new home. The first signs. So within a few weeks, I began noticing things. It started subtly. Footsteps walking down the hallway when no one was there. Doors creaking open slowly as though moved by a gentle hand. None of it felt threatening, so I never panicked. My partner, on the other hand, began having restless nights. He's a skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal. But almost every night he would thrash or mumble in his sleep, trapped in dreams he couldn't remember. I'd gently wake him, and each time he'd look confused and unable to explain what he'd experienced. Shadows and footsteps. Around the 6-month mark, things escalated. The old French doors, which locked in 3 different places, were sometimes found wide open, even though nobody had entered the room in weeks. The flatmate had stayed there before, but had moved out long before this began. So, in the quiet hours of the afternoon, I'd catch glimpses of shadows and the outlines of figures standing just beyond the patterned glass. The steady footsteps pacing up and down the hallway became part of the daily rhythm of the house. A few times, friends on video calls even witnessed doors swinging open or slamming shut in real time. When you acknowledge it. Strangely enough, once I started telling people the house might be haunted, the activity intensified. The once soft footsteps turned to deliberate stops. Doors that hadn't been touched in months creaked open more frequently. It felt like a coincidence, or less like a coincidence, and more like something listening. The voice. The most vivid moment, I think it happened just before we were due to move out. My partner had left for work in the early hours. I lay in the bed in the dark. I'm scrolling on my phone, looking at cats or something. It was around 4, maybe 5 a.m. when a voice all distorted and low and unmistakably male came from the corner of the room. Hello? Hello? I was saying it pretty loud, and I froze, but I forced myself to speak softly, almost instinctively. Yes, I can hear you. I mean no harm. I'm just trying to sleep. And the room fell silent after that. No reply, just the familiar weight of the house pressing in around me. I eventually drifted back to sleep. Epilogue. I'm not sure how interesting this is, but those were just fragments of my time in that house. It was built in the 30s and it had survived several natural disasters over the decades. Sometimes I wonder about the people who lived there before us and what might still linger behind those patterned glass doors. I just hope the new tenant feels more at ease than we ever did. Whispers in the basement. So I started a new job about 4 months ago as a third-shift maintenance tech in a few mid-century towers downtown. And during the interview, my now boss asked me a question that completely threw me off. Do you have any issues working around supernatural stuff? I laughed a bit because I thought it was a joke, one of those hazing the new guy things. He didn't laugh back. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I stammered, no, I don't think so. He nodded like that was a perfectly normal question and explained that night shift tends to hear and see odd things that nobody's ever really been hurt, though, apparently. I've never been a believer in ghosts. I like ghost stories, sure, but I've always been a show-me-proof kind of guy. After I started to get to know my crew, I circled back to that conversation. And it wasn't just some running gag. Nearly everyone except maybe one other new hire had their own stories. And as part of training, they gave me a mini history lesson on the building. Fun fact, the break room and the storage areas are built one level beneath what used to be a chapel. The entire block was torn down in the 20s, but rumor has it that they didn't move everything out when they built the towers. Nothing suspicious there, right? So a month or so after training, I started my first solo shifts. My coworker, a guy who's been on nights since before I was out of high school, told me he's only ever seen something once. But strange sounds, that's routine. Heavy boots in empty hallways, a woman humming old tunes near the stairwell, and sometimes the feeling of someone brushing past you. The weird part is everybody tells these stories like they're describing the weather. No drama, no shaky voices, just facts. One night, he took me to the west wing of the 14th floor, a quiet, half-renovated stretch of offices. 6 years ago, he's doing a safety patrol there, and the sprinklers were offline. And as the elevator doors opened, he saw a man in a gray janitor's uniform pushing an old mop bucket down the hallway. The problem is no janitors work that shift. He called out and asked to see the guy's ID badge. The man turned slowly and grinned, and it wasn't a nice grin. Then walked into a room at the end of the hallway. When my coworker followed, the room was empty. Not just empty, padlocked from the outside, too. My own first something's off moment happened 3 weeks ago. I'm fixing a busted sensor in one of the long concrete service corridors under the towers. My partner was maybe 50 or 60 feet away, checking pipes. I was on a ladder tightening a bracket when I felt a hand tug sharply on the cuff of my pants near my ankle. Not a gentle brush, a solid pull. I snapped and, "Hey, knock it off, man." But when I looked down, nobody was there, and my coworker yelled back confused from way down that corridor. And then there was this morning. I'm walking toward one of the foundation entrances when I heard tires screeching like somebody had slammed their brakes. And at first I didn't even process it, just city noise maybe. And then I remembered I was 50 feet underground. No windows, no traffic. A minute later, a scream ripped through the tunnel, sharp and raw and so close it felt like it was right next to my ear. I didn't wait around to figure out if it was real. I grabbed my flashlight and got the hell out of there. The Vanishing Pair. This happened to me a couple of days ago. I, a 21-year-old female, went to a small tea house downtown with two of my friends. We went to review some notes for upcoming finals. The place is quite old and it's been there for more than a century and a half. But it's absolutely charming with soft yellow lights and wooden floors. They renovated it not too long ago, so it has this perfect mix of old and elegant. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., so the place was nearly empty, and apart from us, there was only an older man reading a newspaper at a corner table. When one of my friends got up to go to the restroom, I tagged along, and to reach in, we had to cross through a small inner courtyard. It separated from the room that we were sitting in by a wide glass door. The walls there were made almost entirely of glass, so from the courtyard we could still clearly see our table and the man reading in the corner. After about 5 minutes, we headed back. We got distracted chatting about my cat and her dog, and we just stood there in the courtyard laughing for maybe a couple more minutes. When I turned to look back into the main room, I suddenly saw two people sitting at a small wooden table next to the window, just a few meters in front of where we'd been sitting. One of them was a woman, short black hair, wearing a soft pink sweater and black pants. The other person, a tall man with a pale face and dark glasses, sat perfectly still. When the woman noticed me looking, she seemed uneasy and like she didn't want me to notice them. So I quickly looked away and pushed the glass door open. But the strange part is as soon as we stepped inside, maybe 2 or 3 seconds later, they were gone. The table was empty, no sign of anyone leaving. The door hadn't opened, no footsteps, nothing. Trying to stay calm, I asked my friend who'd stayed at the table if he'd seen anyone come in. He said no, and my other friend shook her head too. She hadn't noticed anyone either. I wasn't tired, I hadn't had any alcohol or medicine, and I was sipping iced tea. Can't explain it. I want to believe I imagined it, but the image of those two sitting there was so sharp and so real it made me uneasy. When I told my dad later that night, he mentioned that years ago he'd once seen two strangers who matched my description. The very same tea house. They'd disappeared just as suddenly. The room that never slept. The bedroom I grew up in, the one I spent almost my entire childhood and teenage years sleeping in, it's always carried a strange, unshakable aura. It wasn't just my imagination either. Over time, that room became known in my family as the one no one really rests. What makes it truly unnerving is how often it seemed to trigger sleep paralysis, and not just for me, for almost anyone who sleeps there. Before you ask, all the casual suspects have been ruled out. The smoke, gas detectors in the house, they always worked. No gas line, no indoor garage, no mold, no hidden chemicals, no carbon monoxide leaks. None of us, not me, not my family, have any medical or psychological conditions that could explain this. No meds, no substances, nothing like that. The first time it happened, I was around 13. It was rare at first, maybe once every couple of months. But as the years went by, the episodes, they crept in more often, until they came almost every other night. I'd wake up sometime before dawn and I'd be frozen. My chest felt crushed by invisible weight. I couldn't move a single finger and couldn't open my eyes, and the more I struggled, the louder the deep rumbling in my ears grew, like a storm trapped inside my head. I have tinnitus, but this was something else entirely. For a while, I just let it happen. I'd give up, drift back into uneasy sleep, and it wasn't until I was 18 that I learned about sleep paralysis. It seemed to be a fit, logical and scientific, and sort of comforting. But then at 21, everything changed. Moved my bed downstairs to the old basement bedroom my dad used to use. And just like that, the episodes vanished overnight. Not once since then have I experienced paralysis anywhere else. Not in that basement room, not in any other house I've lived in. And that was when it clicked. If this was truly some neurological thing, it should have followed me. But it never did. 15 years later, the room upstairs hasn't lost its grip. If I nap there even for a short while, like half the time it hits again. Doesn't matter if it's midnight or bright noon, so lately it's become more aggressive. I don't even have to fall asleep. Sometimes just closing my eyes is enough to feel the familiar buzzing begin at the back of my skull. My mother sleeps in that room now. Whenever I bring it up, she changes the subject like I'd never said a word. A few weeks ago, my partner decided to prove me wrong, and he's the kind of person who can fall asleep in a moving train with a marching band playing next to him. He'd never experienced sleep paralysis in his life and didn't even know it existed before I told him. The moment he stepped into that room, he said, something felt off, like being watched. He laughed it off and laid down. Not long after, it happened to him too. He wasn't asleep when it hit. He said it felt like being pinned under an invisible weight. His chest locked, his breath caught. And then as I happened to walk past the door on my way to the bathroom, it just stopped. Bolted out of bed, pale and shaking, it admitted he'd never felt fear like that. Kept thanking me for passing by, like my presence alone had broken whatever held him. This man has slept through the thunderstorms and fire alarms. Me walking down the hall wouldn't have really even woken him if he'd actually been asleep. To this day, nobody can explain what's wrong with that room. But every time I walk past it, I can't help but feel it's still wide awake, even when no one else is. Whispers through the camera. My paternal grandmother passed away when I was 21. Although she lived in another town and I only saw her maybe 3 or 4 times a year, I was heartbroken. She was an extraordinary woman, the kind whose kindness seemed to pour out of her without end. Her laughter was soft but contagious. Her hands always smelled faintly of lavender soap. She loved nothing more than to spoil her grandchildren. Even as age wore her down, there was a quiet strength in her presence, something that made everybody around her feel safe and loved. In the months after she left us, our family started noticing small, inexplicable things. A faint trace of her perfume would suddenly fill the hallway, even when no one was wearing any. A ceramic brooch she always kept in her dresser appeared one day on the kitchen counter. She visited some of us in dreams, always smiling and telling us she was at peace. My uncle once said a pair of small birds landed on his balcony rail. They chirped for several minutes as if they were waiting for him. And at that exact moment, he swore he could smell both her lavender soap and the faint scent of my late grandfather's pipe. The most extraordinary moment happened on my birthday, almost a year later. That year, my father gave me a webcam as a birthday gift. A Logitech C920. It's nothing special. No fancy sensors, no movement features, just a simple little camera. So I set it carefully on top of my monitor. I fixed the cable neatly behind the desk and left the room to grab a drink. When I came back, the webcam was facing the window, and I frowned. I had positioned it toward the chair just minutes earlier. I adjusted it again, made sure the cable wasn't pulling, and I sat down for a while, and it didn't budge. Later, I went to the kitchen, went to make myself a sandwich. When I returned, the webcam had turned again, and this time toward the door. Tightened the cable, tied it down so it couldn't move, left the room deliberately, keeping my eyes on it until the door closed. When I returned a minute later, it had turned back toward the door, and I stood there silent for a long time. Then it clicked. This was my father's gift. She'd always called me first thing on my birthday when she was alive. Maybe this was her way of doing it again. I ran to tell my mom what had just happened, and right in the middle of my breathless story, the phone rang. It was my maternal grandmother, and she said, "I don't know why, but I suddenly remembered your birthday right now." It felt like the last missing piece slid into place. After I quietly whispered a thank you into the air, and the webcam just never moved on its own again. Not once. I've used it for years since, and only ever fallen if I bumped it myself. I'd like to think she just wanted to make sure I knew she hadn't forgotten me. The one who lingers. I'm really hoping somebody can help me understand what's happening, maybe how to stop it. My fiancé and I moved into this house with this family in August 2021. We live in the basement. Everything except the laundry room is our space, and it didn't take long before I started hearing footsteps on the stairs at night. When I mentioned it to my mother-in-law, she didn't even act surprised, and instead she unloaded decades of ghost stories about this place. Apparently, ever since anyone can remember, there's been movement on those stairs. Heavy and hurried steps, and sometimes so loud it's like somebody running. Doors open and slam by themselves. Cabinets swing wide and drawers slide out. We'll hear these things when everyone else is gone, and the cats, well, they sense it first. Their ears flatten and they hiss and they fix their eyes on empty spaces. It's unnerving, but nothing has ever actually harmed us. This isn't the first haunted house I've lived in. The one I grew up in was called a vortex of negative energy by a family friend who came to bless it. She told my mom something in that house was drawn to me. My room always had the worst activity. She stepped inside once and said the air made her sick. I moved out in 2016, but part of me feels like something moved out with me. Things escalated in late 2021. My mother-in-law and I, we both saw a dark shape scuttle behind the water heater in the laundry room. It was small and quick, like a shadow pretending to be alive. She said it looked like a little furry creature, almost like a strange tiny yeti. Not long after, we saw the same thing out in front by the porch. Since then, I catch it in my peripheral vision all the time. Sometimes it's the feeling first, that gut-level sense that something's watching. Then I see it and gone in the blink of an eye. Every sighting carries this awful childlike dread, and that feeling when you used to hide under the blankets because you knew something was in the room. One summer evening, my mother-in-law and I were in the basement when that feeling crept in. She was near a white sheet that we'd hung from the ceiling to divide the room, and it looked like, I swear, like something was behind it, and then it grabbed her. She yelped, and I saw the fabric stretch and press in the shape of arms. The cats went absolutely feral. The activity ebbs and flows. When it comes back, it's always worse. My sister-in-law says her closet makes her skin crawl, and things disappear from her room constantly. In the basement, there's an old mirror that everybody avoids. I keep it covered, but whenever the energy ramps up, the cover slides off every single time. The cats hiss at it. I hate looking at my own reflection in it, and something about it feels wrong. We've tried holy water and prayers and sage, and the sage worked the longest. But whatever this is, it always returns. I can't shake the feeling that this thing came with me. No one had seen anything before I moved in, and since then everything intensified. The fear it gives me is bone deep and nauseating. Stronger than anything I felt as a kid. The strange part is my childhood house was also my mom's childhood home, and she saw them too. Shadowy figures that would vanish when you turned your head. Whispers calling our names from nowhere, and I learned not to answer, and always the mirror in the hallway. When I was little, I'd point at it and cry about the people. Years later, after learning about Native American history, I realized what I'd seen. Figures with bright feathers, beads, and jewelry. One man in front held a long staff, and it felt threatening. My mom believes they were trying to protect us, but if that's true, then what's been following me all these years? What is it that lingers? Echoes beyond the veil. I'll start with the dreams I used to have. When I was in elementary school, I often dreamed about moments that hadn't happened yet. Ordinary scenes in classrooms and playgrounds, and faces of people I hadn't met. Later, when those things actually happened, it was like a film that I'd already seen. I was enrolled in a gifted program, and I remember the hospital visits around that time. I still had faint surgical scars near my temples and 5 shallow marks between my eyebrows, barely visible now, like the remnants of teenage acne. Years later, something happened. I overdosed on painkillers and everything went dark. I found myself in a silent silver-gray landscape, like standing on the surface of another planet. And in front of me was a raised triangular platform, and hovering above that, a glowing sphere the size of a small car. It pulsed with a soft golden light that felt like it was breathing. Around me were figures, their voices overlapping like whispers underwater. One of them was a little girl with solemn eyes. In an instant, I saw her entire life and its abrupt ending, and then a message for somebody I knew. Half in fear, half in awe, I asked, "What is this, some kind of afterlife movie?" And a clear voice said, "It's time to return." I woke up. Another night I saw something that didn't belong here. A small creature shaped like a ferret, but with smooth pale skin and 2 insect-like eyes sprouting from its back. It tilted its head at me, and I heard a sharp, high-pitched sound. It vanished, as if melting into the air. I've also seen things in the sky. A dark, silent triangle floating low, wrapped in a strange mist. 3 lights at the edges and a brighter one in the middle. More than once this happened. And during full moons, I've seen orbs moving fast and too precisely to be planes. And I live in Las Vegas, and lately the night sky's been full of green streaks. Maybe meteors, maybe something else. Sleep hasn't been peaceful either. I've had episodes of sleep paralysis, and one's lucid enough to realize the dream was a facade, and when I tore it away, there they were, 3 tall, shadowy figures at the edge of the room. I asked who they were, and they didn't speak, and I whispered, "I see you," scattered like smoke. One night I watched an SUV pull up quietly. 2 men in suits jumped out, retrieved a glowing cylindrical drone from the street and threw it in the trunk and sped off without a word. A man in gray-burnt camo was watching them from behind a power box. Binoculars, notepad, and everything. And then there's small, uncanny things, like the time I daydreamed about frozen grapes on a sweltering Vegas afternoon. I stepped off the bus, half-opened grocery bag on the bench, fog spilling out from a bunch of frozen grapes. Frozen grapes. Huh. Happened twice. I've always had a strange sense of knowing, like seeing the future in detail, more like feeling the shape of it before it arrives, though. When you die, I think someone or something will ask you what you did with the life you were given, so don't live it by someone else's book. Live it with your heart. Keep your mind awake. And your grapes apparently frozen. Whispers by the lake. Hi, I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in an apartment with a couple of roommates. Male 22, male 21. My girlfriend, female 22, and we moved in about a year ago. For the most part, everything was fine, but lately things have started to feel off about them. It began on an ordinary night when me, my roommate, a 21-year-old male, and my girlfriend were chilling in the living room, talking about movies we'd been meaning to watch. And our living room faces a big lake, and that night the blinds were wide open. We could see the still black water under the night sky and a faint outline of the gazebo near the edge. As we talked, we began to feel that weird sensation, like eyes are glued to you. Stared out at the lake, expecting to see something or someone, but nothing. Just the lake swallowing up the dark. We shrugged it off, closed the blinds, and locked the porch door, and that feeling didn't go away. It got heavier, almost like the air itself was pressing against our chests. My girlfriend and my roommate, they both come from families with a long history of spiritual stuff and tarot readers and brujas or something. Energy barriers, you name it. And my own family isn't exactly new to witchcraft either. It's a Hispanic household thing, so, you know. So when all three of us felt that energy, it wasn't just paranoia. My roommate called his mom, who apparently knows how to set up protection barriers. He started mumbling something under his breath, walking around with a lighter and salt, and within minutes, the pressure in the room eased up and we all went back to our rooms. But even as me and my girlfriend lay in the dark, we couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching. She quietly said she thought it might be a woman's spirit. I asked what made her say that, but she just gave me this look and turned away. A couple of months later, I'm home alone, sitting on that same couch. The air shifted again. That crawling sensation ran down my back, and I started hearing things. Soft scratching and shuffling, like something moving inside the walls. My first thought was rats, or maybe crows nesting nearby, since, well, lake life. When I called my roommate, a 22-year-old male, he reminded me the complex had sealed off all entry points for animals before we moved in. The noise kept crawling from the roof, down the walls, and behind me near the fireplace. I sat there frozen, every nerve on alert, listening to the faint tapping in the hallway and kitchen. Went on for 2 hours before everything fell silent again. Didn't sleep well. 3 months later, finally told my parents everything. They made me these little handmade charms, small trinkets meant to ward off unwanted spirits. Hung them on the doors, tucked some behind the TV and under the bed, and for a while, it seemed to work. Everything was kind of quiet. Then came the night after we renewed our lease. Me and my girlfriend were in our room playing Pokemon Go like we usually do before bed, and roommate, 21-year-old male, had a girl over, and roommate, male 22, was in his room with his dog. There's this dog named Cooper, but don't ask me the breed, because I always forget. Alrighty then. Suddenly, the 22-year-old male calls me, and his voice sounds weird and tight and says, "Where are you?" I laugh, and I tell him I'm butt naked in my room, just messing around, and he doesn't laugh. "No, seriously, where are you?" That's when I know something's weird. I tell him I'm in my room and ask him why, and he goes silent. Heartbeat later, I hear something slam. A closet door, and twice. I throw on some clothes, grab my G.U. Tomioka sword, and I head to his room. He's standing at the door with his hands on his head, pale, and he tells me he heard something whisper right through the door, and it said, "Hey." And then, "What are you doing?" First, he thought that it was me screwing with him, perhaps, like a prank that we would do sometimes, but Cooper had heard it too, and the dog had perked up and let out this low huff like he sensed something. That's when the fear really set in. We laughed it off because that's what you do when you're terrified and don't have answers. Even joked about buying a camera for his room, but 20 minutes later he left for his night shift. But I'll be real with you. None of us really slept soundly that night. Super duper real The night it fought back. I used to work at an old department store with 4 levels, and among the staff there is an unspoken rule. Never stay alone on the top floor after dark. People claimed a strange figure and liked to mimic employees who weren't even present, making it seem like they were wandering around. When this new assistant manager he joined, he laughed off the warnings, but soon he got his own story to tell. Happened late one rainy night during closing time. The last of the staff had already kind of clocked out, and the assistant manager was finishing some inventory reports. From the corner of his eye, he noticed someone in a store uniform standing by their supply shelves. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, and he frowned. That particular employee had called in earlier, saying that she wouldn't come in because of a fever. Then the figure slowly turned and walked toward a storage room. A second later, a loud crash echoed, and every single stack of binders in the shelf had been knocked over, scattering across the floor. Annoyance flared up more than fear, and he'd had a rough day, and this was the last thing he needed. Without thinking, he grabbed the heavy barcode scanner on the desk, hurled it straight at the figure. The object hit with a dull thud. But instead of reacting, the figure just tilted its head in a strange, jerky way. And that's when something inside of him snapped. He shouted every curse word in the book and slammed his palm on the desk. "You chose the wrong damn night to mess with me." And he stamped forward, and the figure stepped back, gliding, but not walking, toward the emergency stairwell and faded like smoke into the dark. Before leaving, he yelled one last warning into the empty floor. "Try that again, and I swear I'll make sure you regret it." No one saw the mimic after that night. The whispers died down, and the top floor went quiet. Even the security footage stopped picking at many of these strange things, and this will make me wonder, have you ever known somebody who decided to fight back against something they couldn't explain? I'm one of those people, just not exactly paranormal. When the House Whispers. I didn't know what tag to really do, so I did random. For context, I'm 16. I've been living in this house for a few years now. When we moved here, it wasn't to a new place. It used to belong to my dad's parents. He grew up here, and they passed the house down to him. I've had different weird experiences here, though most of them fade from my memory, and the earliest one I can still remember was sometime last year. I was trying to sleep one night, and every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear these voices. Not like someone whispering next to me, but like they were inside my head. First, it sounded like a man mumbling something unclear. Then a woman giggling softly, but in this really strange way. I got so uncomfortable that I turned my lamp on. Noises just disappeared instantly. A few months later, when my dad was away on a business trip, it was just me and my mom at home. It was around midnight, and I'm making a snack in the kitchen with my iPad propped up watching a show. Next to the kitchen is a laundry room, and that's where the entrance to the attic is. The door to it was open, and from where I was standing, I could see part of it. Suddenly, the lights went out, and from the darkness of the laundry room, this weird laugh came out like a carnival clown. I froze for half a second, bolted down the hallway with my hands against the wall until I reached my parents' room. The second I touched my mom's shoulder, the lights flicked back on. My experiences aren't exactly constant. They come and they go. One night, my dad was out again. My mom's in the bathroom, and she always leaves the inside light on. I came out of my room and saw her through the slightly open door, and I chatted with her for a bit and then went back. I had my AirPods in, so I didn't really hear her leave for the store. When I stepped out later, the bathroom light was still on, and I called out Mom, and after a short pause, I heard yes back. Except it didn't sound like her. It was almost like somebody trying to mimic her voice but not quite getting it right. Checked the bathroom, empty, went to the front door, and sure enough, the car was gone. Waited in the living room until she came back. One night a few weeks ago, I dreamt there was something crawling on my arm like a spider. I could feel the tiny legs brushing against my skin. I woke up flailing, but nothing was there, and the next morning I was changing for school, and a small black spider crawled out from under my desk. Squished it without thinking. And then a few nights ago, at 3 a.m., I'm lying in bed with my back partly uncovered, and I suddenly felt cold air blowing against my shoulder blades. Told myself it was just my head, but the feeling didn't stop. Steady and cold at first, not like my fan. Had been on all night. Then it shifted to my cheek, and the air turned warm and close, but someone breathing right next to me. Chills ran down my spine like little shocks, and I got irritated and yanked the duvet over me. Turned around. Second I opened my eyes, everything stopped. The quiet house that watched. I used to stay with my cousin. Their house was nearly a century old, standing on the edge of a sleepy, fog-covered village. And during the months I lived there, I had some unsettling encounters with something that wasn't entirely human. Some nights the mattress beneath me would tremble, as if somebody pressed a knee into the corner of the bed to lean closer to me. And the town was far from any fault line, and my cousin usually sat in the living room watching old TV shows. She never walked heavily enough to shake the floor. There were moments when I could feel it standing right by me as I lay stiff, pretending to sleep. It leaned so close that I could sense its gaze hovering above my face, patient and curious. I'm convinced it borrowed the voice of an old woman, soft and sing-songy, to whisper my name or laugh quietly near my ear. But I grew up around spiritual energy, and I knew better than to answer. One evening, while I'm doing a cleansing ritual, I sat in the center of a ring of salt and white candles, imagining the light washing this presence away. The candle on my left flickered once, then died as a rush of cold wind brushed my cheek. The rug beneath me shuddered like something had stomped near it. The windows were sealed, the air was still. It felt like the thing was furious I had tried to drive it out, like a breathless exhale from something invisible but close to me. Objects were never still for long, but trinkets on the shelves would clatter to the floor with no explanation. Kitchen door creaked open on its own and soft. There were uneven footsteps following me every time I climbed the wooden stairs. I left that house years ago, but she still lives there, and after a thorough blessing by a local medium, she swears the strange events mostly stopped. I still hope whatever was truly left. Or I still hope whatever it was truly left, I think they mean. I can't explain what it was or why it lingered, and maybe it noticed me because I can sense things most people don't. It wanted me to acknowledge it. Whatever the presence was, it was heavy, like a shadow pressing on your chest. It didn't just want to be seen, it wanted me to feel it. The Quiet Visitor. In the past few weeks, my dog Sabe had been growling at nothing out by the tree line after dusk. It happened often enough that my husband started telling him to check it out. He's convinced Sabe senses something that we cannot, and that he's guarding our home. Sabe carries a special name in our house. He's named after the spirit of Sabe, or Sasquatch. Sabe is short for Sasquatch. Alrighty then. But in my teachings, Sabe stands for honesty. Every generation we keep a dog who bears that name, and our Sabe is a Belgian, oh boy, I can't say that word, Malinois? It's trained to the bone. It's alert and fearless and loyal and deeply connected to us. In our belief, names carry weight, so Sabe isn't just a name, it's a role. No one deceitful ever passes through our door without him noticing. It's been tried, it's been tested, and it's been true. Over the past few weeks, though, strange things have started happening. The back screen door swung open on its own 3 separate times. Twice at night, just this afternoon, actually. The last time, my husband rushed to slam both the screen and the thermal door shut. And where we live, those thermal doors are built to withstand winter, and I mentioned it had already happened a few nights earlier. He gave me this quiet look and admitted, "Yeah, it happened to me too. That's why I've been locking everything up." And that moment made my skin prickle. And since then, we keep doing doors tightly shut, and especially all of them after dark. And last night, while I'm on the phone with my husband, we all heard knocking. It wasn't a soft tap either. It was clear, and all the dogs reacted, which almost never happens at once. Sabe locked onto the door, and muscles tight, a low growl rumbling through him. I immediately got up, locked everything, and just stood there listening. No footsteps, no shadows, nobody at the front or back. And this morning, around 8, I took the cattle dogs out before the kids woke up. My husband's still away, and when I came back from the pasture, the door was wide open, and I clearly remember pulling it shut behind me. All 3 of my kids were still fast asleep in my bed, just like every other morning. My 2 livestock guardian dogs are gone, no sounds. Today I burn sage, clean the house top to bottom, and tomorrow I'll lay a line of salt and set medicine around the property. Set medicine? Strange stories. The light above the silence. To start, let's say that I'm a woman, 24 years old now. The most intense paranormal experiences I've ever had happened between the ages of 14 and 21. This particular story began when I was 14. It started quietly, almost harmlessly, just a strange dream at first. It came back every single night. It was always the same, except the way I died changed. In that nightmare, I was locked inside my grandfather's old wooden house in the countryside. The windows were nailed shut. The door wouldn't move. I finally forced it open and stepped out, and the world outside was swallowed in darkness. A single light hovered above me, soft and pale, casting a perfect circle on the ground where I stood, and just a few steps ahead, the light faded into nothing. Then, from that void, I heard a laugh, and it was slow and harsh, like something amused at me. Then the voice whispered the same words every night. "You belong to me, no matter where you run." I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. I ran anyway. The light moved with me, protecting me as I stumbled down the long street that didn't seem to even end. But always, halfway through, something happens. I tripped this time, and that's when it got worse. The shadow came for me then. It never touched me the same way twice. Sometimes it strangled me, and other times it crushed me. Other times it stabbed or drowned or burned me. And each death was different, but the pain was always real. When I woke up, there were these bruises on my arms and pressure marks on my ribs, and sometimes scratches on my back. And the pain lingered, dull and deep, as if the dream had followed me into the day. For years I lived like this. I grew terrified of sleeping. I would stay awake until dawn, shaking. I knew what waited for me behind my own closed eyes. I would wake up crying with my heart pounding like I had truly actually died. My family is very religious, devout Catholics. They didn't ignore it, and they called several priests actually. told each of them what I had seen and felt and every word the shadow had whispered. One gave me a rosary bracelet, blessed, and told me to never remove it. Another prayed over me, which is like an exorcism prayer, and it was whispered in Latin. Made me repeat prayers daily. A third told me it was a demonic presence and warned me to just not stay or sleep alone, and strangely, he was right. When I shared the bed with someone, my younger sister or my parents, the dreams didn't come. If I woke up shaking, I only had to call out and my father would rush in. He'd hold my hand to pray with me and I'd fall asleep again, clinging to that small safety. But the years left their marks, and living with fear every night changed something inside me. Even now, I still struggle with sleep and I carry the shadows with me, like they're waiting just beyond the edge of my eyelids. I've always learned to breathe through the fear, but it's still there and it's always there. The shadow that walked sideways. I don't want to give away the exact place. That's because I honestly don't want anyone bringing unwanted attention or any kind of investigation to this site. It's a genuinely beautiful area, though. Owner organizes meaningful community events. I want to respect both the land and the people connected to it. What I can say is that this campground sits right along the edge of an ancient indigenous resting area. It's close enough that if you drift just a little ways down the forest path to the left, you'll find it. That ground has held its quiet for over 1,000 years now, and for that reason I won't reveal the name of this camp. In November of 2023, my friends and I joined a weekend gathering there. It was close to midnight when we left the bonfire to walk back through the gravel parking lot toward our old pickup. We were about to make a quick run into town for some late-night food. One house on the ground stands at the far edge of that lot, and there's a single door. It's lit up by a bright overhead lamp that spills into the ground like a stage light. As we crossed the lot, approaching that door, something strange happened. A tall, dark figure appeared out of nowhere, and its shape projected cleanly against the door. It walked fast, cutting across from the shadows on the left side of the house to the right, and vanished back into darkness. It wasn't a blur or some trick of the light. I guess you could just say it had a clear outline and completely in profile. The head was rounded with a long, sharp nose. It's where eyes should have been, and there's nothing but blank shadows. The arms and legs moved like it was walking, but its proportions were wrong. Legs were far too long, almost insect-like. Thighs bent one way, calves the opposite. And instead of feet, the ends came to fine points, like the tips of an old iron tool. Each step seemed to fold backward, almost unnaturally, as if it crossed the floor. Shadow was as tall as the frame itself, top of its head brushing the light perfectly. Its whole body was outlined, but it never cast anything onto the lot around it. It was flat against the door, just a moving shape. I'm certain it wasn't anyone from the group. We're still at least 10 feet away, and nobody in front of us. The whole parking lot area was all empty except for us. The figure appeared suddenly and strode past, dissolved back into the darkness of the wall as if it had never even existed. I can't pretend to know what I saw, and honestly, it's not mine to explain. The indigenous people tied to this land have made it clear that their traditions are theirs alone, so I won't dig into their stories or lore on my own. If somebody from that community ever shared insight, I'd accept it with respect, but beyond that, I'll leave it at this. I saw a shadow walk sideways across a door in the middle of that night, and I've learned to respect what I can't explain. I tried to say parking lot and said parking lot. That was embarrassing. Whispers through the glass. So for context, I've never experienced sleep paralysis before, though I have been fascinated with otherworldly encounters since a strange night. It was a night when I saw a tall glowing figure in the backyard. Posted that story yesterday. And recently I've been trying to stay more aware of signs, coincidences, and little nudges from something beyond us. I'd also been practicing CE-5 meditations. It's to invite or to make gentle contact. Honestly, those CE-5s work, and if your heart's really open and your mind's calm, it'll be a bit better. Some of you might know about Bashar, channeled by Daryl Anka. I adore his teachings, especially his follow your highest excitement formula. So I applied that same feeling when choosing my evening meditation. I picked the one that gave me a spark of curiosity, a candle gaze meditation. So I keep my eyes open and stare softly into the flickering flame. My hope, and let's be honest, my fear, was that if anything wanted to show itself, it might appear gently through the reflections and shadows, not just subtly in front of me. I whispered in my mind, if you want to show yourself, please do it kindly and softly like light, so I won't be scared. After that, I set my intention for a warm, benevolent contact. Nothing happened right away, and I felt peaceful about it. I told myself I'd keep practicing each night. Hours later, I drifted off. I tossed and turned a lot, not sleeping deeply. And around 5:30 a.m., sunlight was already filling my room. My closet has glass panels that reflect my bed like a dull mirror. When I opened my eyes, still half dreaming, I saw my own reflection. Something about it felt different. And that's when I heard it, a soft but clear voice, almost childlike, saying, "Are you awake?" The glass panel began to ripple slightly, as if a breeze was blowing from the inside out. Through that shimmer, I saw two faint golden lights, like eyes in a curved shape that slowly turned into a long grin, far too wide. It didn't look entirely human, but it wasn't monstrous either, just strange. The figure moved toward me, and though my mind screamed, my body didn't obey, and I was frozen and my breath was shallow. The figure retreated for a second, almost like it noticed my fear, and the glass stilled again. I realized then that I couldn't move at all. Sleep paralysis. I'd read about it, but I never felt it. And the voice came again, soft and almost curious. "Are you awake?" The reflection rippled a second time, and this time a tall silver-skinned being emerged halfway out of the glass. Not the classic gray, more delicate and elongated face. Deep black eyes with a soft amber ring. Its posture was cautious, almost apologetic, like it didn't want to frighten me. I wanted to lean closer to somehow show it I wasn't afraid anymore. And in my head I kept saying, I can't move. The moment I struggled, everything blinked out. I must have slipped back into sleep instantly afterwards. So I keep replaying the moment, like was it trying to match my request to appear softly through light and reflection? It felt curious, like a child knocking gently on a door. And honestly, I'm grateful it came gently. Maybe one day we'll be able to meet them without fear, like a conversation we can start on our own terms. Well, that one was a bit different. The night at the Mountain Inn. It's been almost 2 months since this happened, and I've gone back and forth about sharing it, but now that some time has passed, I've found a little more courage. I think I'm ready to tell it. What I experienced that night changed me forever, so here it goes. My family and I flew to Boston to visit my sister, planning to spend 4 days together. The first day, 8/6, was wonderful. We visited Cape Cod and ended the evening with a cozy birthday dinner for my mom at a seaside restaurant. Cape Cod is a pretty cool place. On the second day, we decided to take a trip to Salem. Each of us got a psychic reading for fun, and at the end of my mom's session, the psychic urged her to buy a black onyx pendant, saying that it would help protect her from the negative energy surrounding certain people in her life. She decided to buy it, though none of us took it too seriously at the time. After leaving Salem, we drove to the Crane Estate in Ipswich. Spent nearly 2 hours wandering around exploring the interior a bit, mostly enjoying the gardens and walking along the quiet stretch of beach nearby. And early that morning, we talked about booking a spontaneous overnight trip somewhere in the mountains. Didn't actually get around to it until after we left the estate. Oh, there's a plug in here. On Hotels.com, I found a cozy little inn in Jackson, New Hampshire. Pictures showed a peaceful mountain backdrop, so I booked it right away. I do not like Hotels.com. 2 hours later, after a stunning drive through winding mountain roads, we arrived there. The inn was charming, nothing creepy, nothing strange. The whole trip had felt so full of light joy and a quiet gratitude. We couldn't have imagined that in just a few hours, and everything would change. 3:27 a.m. I woke up with a jolt. My mom standing at the edge of the bed and her head tilted slightly back. She was screaming. Not just startled screaming, but the kind that freezes the blood in your veins. She began stepping toward this door slowly, and I jumped out of bed and grabbed her. The moment I wrapped my arms around her, I felt something I can only describe as an invisible current pulling her forward, and me with her. My feet scraped against the carpet, and my body stiff as I locked in this sort of tug of war with something I couldn't see. The force was so strong it bruised my toes. It couldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds, but it felt like being trapped in a nightmare that stretched on forever. Then the lights flicked on. My sister had jumped out of bed and switched them on, and everything stopped. My mom went limp in my arms and silent, as if waking up from a deep sleep. I collapsed to the floor with my heart hammering and gasping for air, crying uncontrollably. All I could scream was, "It was going to take you." My mom blinked at me in confusion. She didn't remember any of it. And in her mind, she had just been asleep. Meanwhile, my sister was pale and speechless, and she told us that when she first heard the screaming, she thought maybe there was an animal in the room. And then she saw us, and my mom we froze. Frozen near the door with no one there else, and that's when she knew something was horribly wrong. This was and still is the most terrifying experience of my life. And even now, I sometimes lie in bed tense, waiting for that unseen pull to return. I've never been a religious person, but that night shook something loose in me. Can't explain what happened, because part of me wants to call it a nightmare, and another part of me knows that it happened, and I felt it. Whatever that was, real to me. And the memory of that night in the mountain inn is something I'll carry for the rest of my life. The Whistle in the Dark. Exactly a week ago, I had an experience deep in the woods that no amount of research or logical explanation could make sense of. I've struggled with insomnia for years, and one of the few things that helps is going on late-night walks. Last Friday night, after tossing and turning for hours, I decided to get some air. And there's a narrow forested trail behind the community center, not a dense forest, but thick enough you can see straight through it. If somebody yelled, people at the edge of the field would hear you. I walked around until I found a small clearing with an old leaning birch tree and sat down with my back against the trunk. The air was cool and quiet in that heavy way only 2 a.m. can be. I must have zoned out because when I checked my phone, it was already 2:37 a.m., and that's when I heard it. At first, it sounded like somebody carefully stepping through the undergrowth about 20-30 feet away. The sound of leaves crunching was crisp, and it was definitely bipedal, not a raccoon or a deer. The thing that unsettled me was that the ground was littered with brittle sticks and twigs. When I walked in earlier, it was impossible not to snap them. I even scratched my leg on some, but Whatever was moving didn't make a single snapping sound, just soft, measured steps, too light for the ground that they were on. My first thought was maybe a kid sneaking around, but the stride was too wide and too deliberate. And then out of nowhere came the strange sound of whistling. Not a human tune or a bird song, but a sharp, uneven whistle, like someone blowing into a cracked plastic whistle. 2 long notes, a pause, and a series of short, jittery ones. No voice, no rustling other than the steps, just that broken whistle. An icy weight settled in my chest. I turned off my phone screen and I killed the light and held my breath. It was so dark, I couldn't even see my knees, let alone what was out there. And then it moved again. The steps grew faster, too fast. Not like a jog or even a sprint. It was as if something was darting in jagged lines, changing direction every few seconds. The whistle came and went in short bursts, and sometimes, right after a pause in the steps, it was like it was listening. My heartbeat felt so loud I was sure it would hear me. At one point, the sound brushed past me, no more than 15 feet away, and I swear I felt a cold shift in the air as it passed. Then it veered off, steps fading to the woods until there was nothing but silence again. I don't think I've ever gotten up so fast in my life. I practically stumbled out of those trees, heart hammering in my throat. And this past week I've gone over the whole thing again, and, well, foxes or owls or pranks, you name it, none of it fits. No animals move like that without a single twig snapping. No person sprints in dead silence and whistles like a broken instrument. Wish this were something I'd made up, but it wasn't, and it's been stuck in my head every single day since then. The night the door answered back. I asked my mom to tell me again about one of her weirdest experiences with a Ouija board so I could share it here. I also tried to ask the questions I thought you guys would be curious about. It was a warm night in the summer of 1984 in Denver, Colorado. My mom was living by herself in a small upstairs apartment. The fire escape was right outside her kitchen, and because of the heat, she had the back door propped open. The screen door was latched tightly, and she says she'll never mess with that latch and never really need to. That night she invited a neighbor over, somebody that she described as the cautious type, especially with anything spiritual or supernatural. They decided to play with the Ouija board, and she had just bought it at a yard sale. At first, the planchette barely moved, like making it kind of slow, lazy circles. And then, almost like something was waking up, it began spinning faster and faster. So fast, she said, that their fingers couldn't keep up. Suddenly whipped across the table, skidded into the floor, and at that exact second, the screen door behind them burst open with a loud bang. Then it slammed itself shut, and it was like somebody had walked through. When I asked her about the latch, she admitted she didn't remember the exact mechanism, only that it didn't just pop open. You had to press and twist or pull something. She swore she hadn't touched it, and neither had her neighbor. So I asked if she'd ever heard a planchette spinning like that before, and she laughed and reminded me that this was before the internet. No YouTube stories, no creepy Reddit threads. Excuse me, just them on the board. Their attitude toward the Ouija board back then was pure excitement, and she thought it was all fun and curiosity. Her neighbor, on the other hand, was visibly uncomfortable. I also asked her if she ever suspected she might have been moving it herself without realizing. I have overspent my voice, excuse me. Coca-Cola. That helped a little bit. So her neighbor thought it was all fun and curiosity, and this other neighbor, very visibly uncomfortable. I also asked her if she ever suspected she might have been moving it herself without realizing. She shook her head and said, no way, it felt like it was pulling us, not the other way around. And for what it's worth, I've tried to replicate that moment myself. If you spin the planchette fast and let go, it does fly a bit, but not like what she described, especially with two people trying to keep it in sync. Hard to generate that kind of momentum together. And also, she said something I found really telling, that it was moving so fast she felt the urge to let go. And that's not how people usually describe something they're controlling. I doubt her nervous neighbor would have tried to scare her by secretly doing it, and we can't ask him now anyway. She lost touch with him decades ago. Logically, yeah, the latch might not have been fully set, but the timing of that slam, the exact second the planchette flew, gives me chills. Later, my mom told me that she became almost hooked on using that board. She said she often talked to what she thought was the spirit of a man who died in the 1600s. She used it with all kinds of people, but never alone. She always thought you had to have two people because the picture on the box showed that. It's a funny box, though. The Message That Waited. About 4 years ago, my dad passed away because of a long illness. It happened right in the middle of the lockdown, so everything felt strangely quiet and unreal. It's not that we, his family, denied his death. It's just that it didn't register as being real. Well, that's weird. It was like my brain refused to accept that somebody who had always been there was suddenly gone. In fact, he was the first person I ever truly lost. During his last weeks, his condition went downhill, so fast it was scary, and he could barely whisper, and lifting his arms was exhausting. If he needed anything, even something small like adjusting his blanket, he'd just use his phone to text me or my mom or my sister. He couldn't speak much anymore, but he could still type. That became a rhythm day after day, and toward the end his messages became fragmented and confusing. He mixed up letters and words, and some sentences were so garbled they didn't make any sense at all. It was heartbreaking because we could feel him slipping away, not just physically, but piece by piece, and after the funeral, my mom kept his phone line active. I remember one night she showed me the very last text that he sent her, and it was simply asking her to open the window. He couldn't breathe well. She held onto that phone for weeks, using it to reply to friends who texted their condolences. And when that ended, she turned it off and tucked it into the bottom drawer of her dresser. Nobody opened it again. It just stayed there like a frozen moment in time. Half a year later, out of nowhere, my mom called me. Her voice was shaking, and she'd found something. A text, and it wasn't a new message exactly. It had been there all along, just unnoticed. My dad died February 2021. My mom thought the last thing he ever sent was that short, desperate message about the window. But in March, another message had arrived, and she didn't see it until September. The strange part was that what it was said, it wasn't about him or a goodbye, it was about me. My dad and I had a complicated relationship, lots of love, but lots of distance, and even more unspoken words. But in that message, he told my mom I had a kind heart, and that he was proud of the person I was becoming. He didn't mention anyone else, just me. The words were clear, unlike his last confusing texts. We don't really have an explanation. The phone line had still been active for a while after he passed. My mom's account was still tied to it. Maybe it was a delayed message, maybe it was a glitch, or maybe it was something else entirely. I still don't know what to believe, but every now and then I think about how that message waited months to be read. Almost like it wanted to find the right moment to be heard. The voice behind the door. This happened just a few months ago, late August. Every summer, my sister, her husband, and their 2 little girls come spend a few months at my house. It's becoming something we all look forward to. The quiet house suddenly fills with laughter and the smell of my sister's cooking. And that day started out completely ordinary. I left for work early in the morning as usual. Around 1 p.m., my phone buzzed, and it was a message from my sister. "Are you home?" I texted back quickly. "Nope, still at work." She replied almost immediately, "Are you sure? Don't joke." I laughed and wrote, "I'm serious. I haven't had lunch yet." She didn't answer for a minute, and then one line came back. "Okay, we'll talk when you're back." When I returned home around 5:30, I found her waiting at the door with her face pale, and she said that earlier she'd gone upstairs to grab some clean towels when she noticed my bedroom door slightly open. The light was on. So she called out, "Hey, are you here already?" From the inside, somebody answered, "Yeah, I'm just getting ready." In my voice. Thinking I'd come home early, she knocked softly, and my older niece called my name too, and again the same voice answered, "I'll be out in a second." But no one did come out. They waited at the door until the light suddenly flicked off, and then silence. When they opened it, the room was empty. Everything exactly the way I'd left it in the morning. I'd show them my work ID logs and even a photo I took of the office at 1 p.m., and my sister just stared at me, as if trying to find another explanation. We both knew what she had heard wasn't her imagination. That night, as we got ready for bed, my little niece climbed into the couch next to me and whispered, "Uncle, if you weren't here, then who talked to us?" I smiled, I patted her head and said gently, "Maybe just the wind playing tricks on you." But in my chest, I felt something tighten. Whatever had spoken from behind that door, it had sounded exactly like me. The man who wasn't supposed to be there. Back between 2014 and 2016, I went through a difficult stretch of sleepless nights, plagued by frequent sleep paralysis and strange looming dreams that felt like the end of the world. And I've always been a vivid, lucid dreamer, somebody who remembers their dreams in sharp detail. But during that period, one particular experience left a mark I've carried quietly ever since, and I've never shared this with anyone until now. In 2016, I had a dream that at first was utterly ordinary. Can't even remember what it was about. It wasn't worth remembering until something changed. In the middle of the dream, I suddenly felt the hair at the back of my neck rising, like a cold draft had slipped in from nowhere. A deep, instinctive dread pulled me out of the, sort of passive flow, you could say, of that dream. I became aware that I was, in fact, dreaming. But more than that, I felt unmistakably that I wasn't alone. And that's when I saw him, Eric from It. He didn't blend into the background like the usual hazy figures in dreams. He stood out clear, solid, real clear. Using his 40s shoulder-length hair hanging loose, and his yellow-green eyes glinted in a way that felt aware. When our eyes met, he inhaled sharply like somebody caught trespassing. And in that instant, I knew without a doubt that he wasn't supposed to be there. And I shouted at him, what exactly I can't remember, and I sprinted toward him. He bolted, weaving through the surreal corridors of my dream until he ended up in a small, sterile bathroom. He stumbled into the bathtub, curled up tightly like a cornered animal, and then just like that, he vanished. I woke up moments later. My heart was racing, my stomach twisted in a cold, nauseating knot, as if some invisible line between my mind and the real world had been crossed. Back then, I was fairly new to my job. Eric and I didn't work together much. I'd mostly just pass him in the hall. The strangest thing, though, was when I saw him at work the following week, he was jumpy visibly, and he was uncomfortable around me. He was avoiding eye contact, and it was subtle, but kind of impossible to ignore, honestly. Over the next few years, we ended up collaborating on a few projects, and he slowly relaxed. There's always this lingering look in his eyes, a flicker of something that made me feel like he knew, like he was silently wondering if I remembered that night in my dream. I thought more than once about asking him, half confrontation, half desperate search for clarity. But how do you bring that up without sounding unhinged? Hey, you remember when I saw you in my dream? Don't ever do that again. Not exactly the kind of thing a white-collar professional with a mortgage and kids can just say at the coffee machine. I've since moved away and left that job, and thankfully I've never again felt anyone else in my dreams. That night has never quite left me. So is there any actual research out there about people entering the dreams of others? I mean, I know it sounds like something out of Inception, but I can't help but wonder if dream observation or whatever this was is something people have studied. Whispers in the walls. My house is almost a century old, 98 years to be exact. I moved in with my partner last spring, and since then we started a small oddities shop sort of a thing. Or, what? Sorry, complete brain fart. What started as small oddities has grown into something that makes my skin crawl. In the beginning, it was just tiny things. Creaks at night, random temperature dips, that kind of stuff you tell yourself is just old house things. We try to laugh it off, but now the laughter is long gone. Some nights I jolt awake drenched in sweat, the room boiling hot like somebody locked me inside of an oven. It's not just me, my partner feels this too. Other times it turns bitterly cold for no reason, cold enough that our breaths fog up like we're outside in winter. And then there are smells, rotten wood, smoke, and damp earth, and they come without warning and disappear just as fast, leaving us uneasy. We've had experts over more than once, and inspectors and plumbers and HVAC techs, you name it. All of them said everything was perfectly fine, no leaks, no faulty wiring, no mold, no explanation. Yuck with the mold. It's one afternoon, late July, scrubbing the kitchen counters when I heard my partner's voice call a casual, "Hey," from the attic, and I froze. They were at work, and I told myself it was just my head, till it came again, and again. When I climbed the attic stairs, the same voice called out from behind me downstairs. Then it started whispering my name, banging sounds then followed. It's like somebody was hurling furniture around, but no matter where I went, the noise stayed the same volume. It's like it was coming from the walls themselves. It's not just noise. There have been moments lying in bed where I feel hands, invisible ice-cold hands, like they're closing around my throat. I gasp for air, but nothing's there, and other times both of us wake up with burning scratches on our arms, bruises on our legs. I can't explain how they got there. The house feels angry. It doesn't feel like something that wants to share space. It feels like something waiting for us to break. And I've never been somebody to believe in ghosts or curses, but every creak of the floorboards sounds like a warning. I'm scared to be alone, and I'm scared to sleep, and the worst part is, whatever it is, it feels closer every night. A call before the storm. Some time ago, I had a really rough argument with my wife. And to be honest, the reason was almost laughable. Something about house chores and who was supposed to do what, but somehow that tiny spark set off a fire neither of us saw coming. Days passed with cold silences and sharp words, and it reached a point where we weren't just arguing anymore. We were actually discussing separation. One night, after another tense dinner, we sat across from each other and decided to set a final talk, and we agreed to give ourselves a few days to breathe and reflect, and then on a specific evening, we'd sit down and make a decision. Either rebuild our marriage or walk away from it. No one else knew, and I didn't confide in my friends, and my wife promised she didn't say a word to anyone either. Those are all good moves. Then the night before that conversation, something odd happened. My father-in-law, who lives in a small town in Spain, suddenly calls us. We hadn't spoken to him in weeks at this point. First thing he said was, "I don't like this quiet." And I froze for a moment. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it with a certain weight to it. So I asked him what he meant. He spoke indirectly, almost poetically, saying things like, When a house goes silent, it's rarely good reasons that it happens. It felt unsettling, like he was sensing something miles away. Before hanging up, he added, "I'll call you tomorrow at the exact same time." Coincidentally, or maybe not, that was exactly when we had planned to have our make or break talk. Next day, right on the dot, he called again. He didn't greet me the way he usually does. Instead, he went straight to it. "You are the pillar of your home. You don't leave the house standing in a storm without holding it up. If you walk away now, you'll regret it." I remember sitting there stunned. It was too precise to just be a hunch, so I told him everything, the fight and the silence, the decision we're about to make. He simply replied that he felt it. Said he woke up with a knot in his chest and knew I had to speak to him, or knew that he had to speak to me. My wife called her mother later to check if anybody had said anything and if he'd somehow found out through someone. But her mother denied everything and still insists to this day that no one said a word, and my father-in-law never explained where his feeling came from. That night we decided not to have the final talk, not yet. We held each other in silence instead, and slowly we worked our way through the mess. Still married. Not just out of habit, we're happy. That strange, perfectly timed call changed everything. Well, that's actually super, super awesome. I like hearing things like that, and also congratulations. That's rare. The Night Death Whispered. This happened not too long ago, June of this year, 2025. For nearly 2 weeks, my mother kept complaining about a strange rotting smell coming from my room. I cleaned every corner, I washed my clothes, opened the windows wide, even sprayed air freshener. The smell never went away. It reminded me of something damp and forgotten, like mold and decay. At the same time, I had this unshakable feeling that something was going to happen to my dog, Luna. Couldn't explain why, just a heaviness in my chest that stayed with me. Then one afternoon, when I came back from school, I saw my mom standing outside on the sidewalk, and she looked pale and tense. She said softly, "I need to tell you something." Before she could finish, I said, "It's about Luna, isn't it?" Her eyes widened. She asked how I knew. And yes, the dog passed away that morning. And it was Thursday, June 19th. And that night I had a nightmare. And in the dream, somebody pointed a gun at me and shot me near my right shoulder, and it burned so real that when I woke up, I felt a dull throbbing pain there. At first, the day went on like normal. But as night came, the pain got worse, and it felt as if something cold had sunk beneath my skin. My vision blurred, my chest tightened, and a strange dizziness seemed to wrap around me. Then came the smell again, stronger and heavier. It was as if I wasn't just in the air anymore, it was on me, and I pressed the t-shirt I'd worn before showering against my face. It reeked like something dead. I knew the smell wasn't just around me, it was inside me. I suddenly saw an image in my mind. Monday, standing alone at the bus stop, somebody walking toward me, a flash of light and then nothing. And a voice inside me whispered clearly, "You're not going to make it to Monday." I broke down, shaking and crying, and ran to my mom. Told her everything, the pain, the dream, the smell, the vision. She didn't hesitate. She held my hand and said, "We'll pray." As we started praying in the kitchen, I noticed the lights flicker, and she didn't see it, but I did. I felt something heavy pressing against me, like a shadow clinging to my back. We prayed for what felt like hours, but probably 20 minutes. Slowly, the order began to fade, and my breathing calmed, my chest felt lighter, and my aunt, who's very religious, by the way, they also prayed for me over the phone. After that night, I never smelled that smell again. I'm convinced that if we hadn't prayed, something terrible would have happened. That Monday, I woke up with a piercing headache. I begged my mom to pick me up from school early. I never waited for that bus. I am still alive, but something wanted me gone. Later, I started watching videos and reading stories, and many said the same thing. When animals die first and the smell of death follows you, it can mean witchcraft or a curse. I don't know who would ever wish that on me, but I haven't forgotten that night when death whispered my name. And I hope anybody who has smells they don't want to be smelling dissipate with haste. And of course, beyond that, sweet dreams. Thank you for listening.